Democrats, weak on military, weak on foreign policy. Republicans are not. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And before I get into that topic, I want to give a quick reminder that if you like Bold and Blunt, go to edify.app, the platform for faith-based podcasts, and find Bold and Blunt there among the lineup. I am happy to announce that Bold and Blunt is considered worthy of Edify lineup. So check it out, download Bold and Blunt there, or you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered, Spotify, Apple, and at WashingtonTimes.com. Go there, WashingtonTimes.com, find my hyperlinked name on the front page, click on it, scroll to the bottom of one of my pieces, and you will see easy peasy directions on how to sign up for my 3 times a week newsletters at the Washington Times. They come out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and contain all my commentaries that I write all day long at the Washington Times, giving you the bullet points you need to fight the far left loons that have taken over the Democrat Party. So you can get my 3 times a week newsletter, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with my commentaries and my twice weekly Tuesdays and Thursdays Bold and Blunt podcasts. Listen to this.
The President and First Lady paid their respects as the remains of 13 service members returned to U.S. soil at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. 11 men, 2 women, ranging in age from 20 to 31. They were Marines, a soldier, and a Navy corpsman.
That was CBS News. And what was the occasion? That was August of 2021, when the remains of 13 U.S. troops killed in the Kabul suicide bombing during Feckless Joe Biden's feckless withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was when the dignified transfer of these fallen heroes of America took place. And Biden, alongside his wife Jill, what did they say? What did they say in a statement? Well, here's a statement Biden made just prior to the transfer. The 13 service members that we lost were heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice in service of our highest American ideals, and while saving the lives of others. Their bravery and selflessness has enabled more than 117,000 people at risk to reach safety. Well, isn't that quaint? Isn't that very nice and dignified and solemn of President Joe Biden to recognize? And yet, there were the feckless actions of the feckless Joe Biden as he stood fecklessly by, watching these flag-draped coffins come off the aircraft. Listen to this. A Fox News journalist pressing Jen Psaki about Joe Biden's fecklessness during this so-called dignified transfer.
One question on the dignified transfer, and I want to get to Afghanistan. Some of the Gold Star families have criticized the president's conduct at the dignified transfer. There was a father of one Marine who said that the president appeared to be checking his watch every time a flag-draped transfer case came out of the plane. And a sister of another Marine said that it felt like a fake and scripted apology. Was the president looking at his watch, and does he have a message to those people who felt that they were offended?
Well, I would say his message to all of the family members who were there, those who were not even in attendance, is that he is grateful to their sons and daughters.
Blah, blah, blah. The question was the president looking at his watch? And guess what? Even Snopes, that so-called fact-checking website that gives you clear and unbiased and truthful fact checks of media coverages, but that oftentimes simply advances the narrative of the Democrat Party, of the left, right? They do harsh fact-checking when it comes to conservative rhetoric, but when it comes to Democrat rhetoric, they carry the water. Well, even Snopes reported this. Did Biden check watch multiple times during transfer of fallen soldiers. That was the question marked headline on Snopes, published September 1st, 2021, updated a couple days later, September 3rd, 2021. During the dignified transfer of U.S. soldiers killed in Afghanistan, U.S. President Joe Biden appeared to glance at his watch, Snopes wrote. And how did they rate that? True. Even Snopes couldn't carry the water too far on that one. Though Snopes did try and downplay as much as possible under guise of reporting only factual, truthful evidence. They did downplay as much as possible the number of times Biden checked his watch as these fallen heroes were being unloaded from the aircraft. Snopes wrote, Biden was not on video during the entire broadcast of this solemn ceremony, so we can't say for certain how many times he checked his watch. We watched this full video and looked through photographs from Getty's Images, Reuters, and the Associated Press to see if Biden checked his watch at any other time during the ceremony, as noted by USA Today. An Associated Press photographer captured 2 images of the president as he appeared to glance at his watch. As these photographs were taken 10 minutes apart, it appears that Biden checked his watch at least twice during the ceremony. A third photograph from Getty photographer also captured Biden glancing at his watch, but Snopes continued to write, that photograph may show the same moment captured by the previous photographer from USA Today, or at a different moment shown in the video. So Snopes had to admit that, yes, Biden checked his watch, but Snopes didn't have to admit that Biden checked his watch as many as 10 times, as was reported back during that horrible transfer, that horrible dignified transfer that was far from dignified under the watch of the feckless Joe Biden and his wife, Jill. Can you imagine being a family member of one of those 13 fallen American heroes and seeing on video Joe Biden glancing at his watch as if to say, is this almost over? Is this almost at an end? Is it snack time yet? Is it time to get my daily ice cream cone yet? Seriously, why would he even wear a watch if he couldn't keep himself from looking at the watch? Doesn't he have handlers who always tell him where he has to be and at what time? If anybody does not need a watch, it is the President of the United States. Because the President of the United States has schedulers and handlers and aides and assistants who prod him along down the path toward the next scheduled event. So the fact that he even wore a watch at all defies logic. It's completely unnecessary. But the fact that he couldn't keep himself from checking his watch, not just once, not just twice, but numerous times during what has to be one of America's most, as a national event, one of America's most somber occasions, just shows the utter scorn and derision and unconcern, coldness even, that this White House has for those who would give all, for those who would sacrifice all to protect this country, this great country of ours. And that's like Democrats, though, right? Democrats never hold America's military in high regard. Democrats think that the only people who join the military are those who can't get real jobs in America and accomplish real important things in America. Democrats think the military is the place where the low information types go, the place where those who can't hold their own in the real world go. They think it's the place for deplorables. Well, you know what? Maybe it is the place of deplorables, if deplorables is defined as those in America who truly love America recognize what makes America exceptional and are willing to give all in the sacrifice of protecting all that makes America exceptional.
Above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenals of the world is so formidable as the will and moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. It is a weapon that we as Americans do have. Let that be understood by those who practice terrorism and prey upon their neighbors.
Of course, there's somebody who understands or who understood the greatness of America, the spirit of America, Ronald Reagan, in his inaugural address, talking about what makes America great. It's not just free men and women, it's the determination of free men and women to give all in order to preserve and protect and maintain that freedom. Democrats don't understand that. Democrats are too busy checking their watches to see if they have someplace better to be.
Socialism destroys nations, but always remember freedom unifies the soul. To safeguard American liberty, we have invested a record-breaking $2.2 trillion in the United States military.
That was President Donald Trump discussing the strength of America's military during his 2020 State of the Union address. And boy, it didn't take long for the Feckless Joe Biden administration to tear down those walls, to tear down the greatness of America's military. Did it. And my guest today has some very educated thoughts on foreign policy differences between this current administration and the previous administration. His name is Fred Fleitz, and he now serves as vice chairman of the America First Policy Institute Center for American Security, but he previously served in a capacity with the National Security Council with the Donald Trump administration, and he's here today to discuss Joe Biden and foreign policy, which is to say Joe Biden and how he's failed America on foreign policy. Hopefully we can contain this to just 15, 16, 17 minutes or so. Fred, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
So let's look at what Joe Biden is doing right now on his Asia trip. He just came out and he talked about how the United States would be involved militarily if China were to invade Taiwan, but then it seems like that has been walked back a bit. What's taking place there? What's going on?
I think that the damage this president is doing to America's credibility, to American prestige, is just shocking. This is the third time that Biden has made a statement about U.S. defense of Taiwan that is inconsistent with U.S. policy that had to be walked back. And remember, he said other things this year, like regime change in Russia, Putin can't remain in power. We now have a situation where America's friends and enemies simply disregard what the President of the United States says because they don't think he's mentally competent. They know if he says something decisive, it's probably a mistake and it's going to be reversed by his staff.
Just to clarify, talk about what the one China policy is.
Well, we have something called strategic ambiguity concerning China. Now, we more or less recognize one China, but we don't make it, we have an informal recognition of the government of Taiwan. We don't have an embassy there, but we have an economic interests institute, something like that, which is essentially diplomatic representation, but it is not. We made this decision when we decided to recognize the Chinese government, I think in 1972, but Taiwan is an ally. We do recognize it as a separate country, but what we would do if China decides to attack Taiwan, we keep that ambiguous because we're trying not to stir the pot and worsen tensions with China.
Right. Now, what do you think the chances are? If I'm China right now, I'm looking at the timeline of the rest of Joe Biden's administration, and I'm thinking, if I want to invade Taiwan, now would be a great time to do it.
I think that the Chinese Communist Party is determined to take back Taiwan eventually. I believe the incompetence of this administration, and not just Biden, but his whole foreign policy team, his foreign policy in general, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, an unserious foreign policy that is devoted to climate change, which the Chinese think is a joke. I think this has moved up their timeline. And I imagine that the Chinese don't think that Biden will be reelected, and they're now looking at the best opportunity they may have in history would be to invade before Biden leaves office.
Yeah, see, that's what I think, too. I'm not a national security expert like you yourself are, but that's just common sense.
I mean, many have said that China's not ready. I just don't think we know. And I will also say that the Chinese government is going to look closely at what happened in Ukraine, the mistakes that the Russian government made, the capabilities of new weapons that the Ukrainians used against the Russians to avoid making the same mistakes, to take advantage of new technology. Now, of course, the Taiwanese will do the same thing. They will look at weapons that the Ukrainians used to beat a Goliath that they were battling and use them against China. So both sides are going to learn, but I fear that the Chinese government is probably going to take best advantage of the lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict.
Which country do you think America has to worry about more right now, China or Russia?
China. Russia is a shadow of the Soviet Union. I remember people saying when Russia invaded Ukraine that we may be looking at a new Cold War. Russia's not capable of a global Cold War, which is what the Cold War was. It's a much weaker nation. It has an economy maybe the size of Italy. We're now seeing how weak its military is. Its economy is based on resources and energy exports, which are highly volatile. China, however, is an existential threat to our security, to global security. It has the largest navy on earth right now. It's building up its nuclear arsenal, its intelligence services. Not that Russia's not a threat, but China is a far more serious and long-term threat than Russia.
So looking at China, would you say the bigger threat to America is the military threat from China or the cultural seepage onto American soil?
I think the military threat is enormously troublesome, but the theft of intellectual property is a big concern. Intelligence operations, efforts to sabotage U.S. infrastructure, cyber warfare, they are an across-the-board threat. And so I think the military threat is something we really have to take seriously. I think that the improvement of the Chinese military, the improvement of Chinese missiles and their nuclear program creates real concerns for freedom of navigation in the Asia-Pacific for the U.S. Navy. And I mean, we're now looking at a situation where aircraft carriers and other ships are extremely vulnerable to missiles, which the Chinese call carrier killers. So I think the military threat is very significant.
Let's just say, for discussion's sake, that Donald Trump runs again in 2024 and he wins again in 2024. Would it take just 4 years to reel back the Chinese threat for good? Or would we have to look longer term than that? And if it is longer term, what steps does America need to take in order to keep China at bay for the long term?
I think for many of our adversaries, they respect strength. And I think a strong America with a decisive president who uses military force prudently but is prepared to use it if he has to promotes our security and global security. I think that Trump can roll back a lot of the damage done by Biden. I don't think it will take 4 years just because he will roll out another very strong America First approach to national security that ignores what the foreign policy establishment is saying and promotes a stable world order without the unnecessary use of American force, without getting us in unnecessary wars.
But China's patient, right? They know that America undergoes political change every few years. What would it take in order to just completely disband the idea of China becoming a global leader?
I think China has severe internal problems. They have demographic problems. They have economic problems. I've never believed these economists who said that the Chinese economy would be the top economy by 2050 because of the mismanagement of their economy, the mismanagement of real estate and their banks. I think that they have issues that they have to deal with internally, and it's important that we take advantage of those issues, that we not let them dominate the global economic system. China would like to set up another reserve currency based on their currency. I don't see that happening in the short term. Maybe they'll be able to do that with a group of rogue states, but the dollar will remain the reserve currency. The world will be relying on the dollar and the euro and the pound. They're not going to be relying on the Chinese currency, and I think that is going to limit their influence, but they're slowly going to try to chip away at this, but I don't see them having the success that some people think they're going to have over the next 50 years.
Well, that's optimistic. Let's look at Afghanistan just briefly, because Afghanistan has really moved off the national stage in terms of media watchdogging and even reporting, but the reverberations from that continue. What do your sources, what does your intelligence tell you about what's going on in Afghanistan on the ground right now, and what it means for the future of America, freedoms, for America to be taken seriously on the world stage?
We get bits and pieces about what's going on in Afghanistan on the ground. The Taliban is going against their word in terms of respecting human rights and the rights of women. The situation for people who are not loyal to the Taliban government is getting worse and worse. But we really don't know exactly where the Taliban is going, to what extent that Afghanistan is becoming a safe haven for terrorists, how all the weapons that we left behind are going to be used and distributed to radical Islamist terrorist groups around the world. We had seen indications that terrorists were flocking to Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrawal. My guess is that's continuing, and that there are pretty serious terrorist groups who are mobilizing in Afghanistan and planning future attacks on the West.
Give a summary of how you consider Joe Biden's treatment of Ukraine, Russia right now.
I think we've mostly seen leading from behind. We had, before the invasion, we had these series of statements where, he's going to release intelligence, he's going to warn Putin, you better not invade or you'll be sorry. And, when Putin invaded anyway, I think that hurt our credibility. I support most of the arms that have been sent to the Ukrainians so far by the Biden administration. But what concerns me is that I don't think there's been adequate oversight. And I agree with Senator Rand Paul concerning the latest bill to send, I think it was $40 billion, but it may be more than that now, of aid, that we really shouldn't be sending that aid unless an inspector general is named to monitor exactly where that aid and that money is going. I don't understand why the Biden administration doesn't want to do that, and I think if that's the game they're going to play, they're going to lose Democratic and Republican support for helping the people of Ukraine. I think this war is at a tipping point, and providing adequate weapons to Ukrainians right now might allow the war to at least reduce itself to maybe simmer along. I don't think there's going to be a peace treaty or a settlement in the short term, but I don't want to give the Russians an opportunity to recover from the devastating losses that they have suffered over the last few months.
Where could the American taxpayer money be going that we should be most concerned about?
Well, first of all, it's been wasted on these infrastructure bills, which have driven up inflation. I think that we should keep taxes low and spending low. And I think if we did that, the economy would start to recover. I'd like to see policies to make us energy independent again. That doesn't require spending by the U.S. government. It means lowering regulations. And if we could get those regulations done, we could be producing energy, and it would help our economy across the board. But I'm not really, Cheryl, I'm not into spending more money. I think that we've spent far too much during the pandemic and under the Biden presidency. I think it's time that we drastically cut spending.
Agreed on that. Specific to the $40 billion that the U.S. taxpayers will be sending Ukraine, where should we be concerned where that money could end up?
Well, I think there's a real concern about corruption. You know, when you write a big check like that and it isn't being monitored and there's not strings attached, I'm not accusing the Zelensky government of being corrupt, although some people have. But this happens in war situations. So I would like to see real bipartisan effort for accountability. We did this in Afghanistan. We had something called, it was called SIGAR, but SIGAR. It was the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan. There should be something similar for Ukraine.
Could Joe Biden have done anything to prevent this Russia-Ukraine war?
I think so. There actually are people out there who have blamed Donald Trump for Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And when they say that, I say, well, we've had 4 presidents in a row, and Putin invaded neighboring states during 3 of them, George W. Bush, Obama, and Biden, but not Trump. Because I think Trump had a decisive foreign policy. He also tried to engage Putin. I don't think Putin liked him, and we know that people criticize Trump for his approach to Russia. But I think Trump was decisive. He also was unpredictable. And I spoke to a former Russian oligarch recently who told me that. He also said that Putin did not know what Trump would do from one day to the next. He was stunned at the move of the U.S. Embassy from Jerusalem. When we dropped bombs in Syria after the use of chemical weapons, we dropped bombs in Afghanistan against ISIS, and Putin just did not know what Trump would do, because Trump was prepared to use military force when he thought it was prudent. Putin didn't like Trump, but he respected him as a leader. If Biden had acted that way, I don't think we'd be in the situation right now. Instead, by demonstrating weakness and indecisiveness and an unserious foreign policy, I think that directly led to this invasion of Ukraine.
I've heard on national news discussions, Democrats in particular, blaming everything from gas prices to inflation, the inflationary costs of food, on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How common sense is that? How accurate is that?
The American people know that's not true. They know inflation was going up, fuel prices are going up before the invasion of Ukraine. They know this is Putin's fault. They know this is Biden's fault. They know that Biden has been at war not just with fossil fuels, but with fossil fuels, vehicles that run on fossil fuels. He would like energy prices to be higher. He talked about weaning us off fossil fuels during the campaign. I think most Americans laugh at Biden when he calls this the Putin price hike. They know that isn't true. And so the more he says that, I think the more damage he's doing to himself and to his party.
And I know our time is up. I just have one more question, I guess. When I look at Joe Biden and this administration and its foreign policy, I don't see anything that is praiseworthy. But maybe I'm being too partisan. Maybe I'm just being too critical. Do you see anything that this administration is doing that could be regarded as beneficial for America when it comes to foreign policy?
I wish I could say I did. It has been... There's been a knee-jerk approach to undo everything that Trump did. There's been an approach that we have to work through the UN. We have to focus on climate change as a national security crisis. Up and down on every issue, Biden has been absolutely wrong. I can't think of anything that has benefited American security by this president, and it really worries me because we have over 2 years left, and I worry what is the next crisis that will be caused by Joe Biden's foreign policy incompetence.
Well, I guess he's got a perfect record on that. Perfect record in failure, so good for him, right? Fred Fleitz, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So what's the takeaway here? Don't vote Democrat. That's one takeaway. After all, our enemies, our foreign enemies, rattle sabers at America. And what does Joe Biden do in response? He waves a waffle cone filled with, what is it, chocolate chip? Mint chocolate chip? I forget. The media had this big discussion about what his favorite ice cream cone flavor was back early on in his presidency. I guess it fell under my radar. I'll have to look it up. Anyhow, thank you for listening. If you like Bold and Blunt, go to edify.app and find Bold and Blunt there. It's the platform for faith-based podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt anywhere podcasts are offered, including at washingtontimes.com. And one more quick mention. Check out my latest book, Lockdown, The Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. You know who doesn't want you to read that book? Joe Biden and Joe Biden's cronies. If that's not a ringing endorsement, I don't know what is. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.